Well, this is usually the part where I put a funny or amusing teaser before I start the actual video. But not today, because well frankly I'm feeling neither funny nor amused about how low the Boeing Corporation has sunk this time. And that says a lot considering all the pain and suffering Boeing has caused since the inception of the MAX program to destroy hundreds. No, make that thousands of lives, including everyone who loved the 346 innocent passengers who were lost in the two MAX crashes. But Boeing's most recent attempt to escape responsibility for the MAX disaster by claiming in court that none of the passengers suffered any pain or psychological trauma as a result of the crashes has actually angered and disgusted me to see how this once mighty American icon has fallen. So I apologize in advance if I'm not my usual jolly self, but Boeing has really pissed me off this time, and I think you will be too.
Because I'm gonna get him! My client should go right to jail! The son of a is guilty!
That's next on Maximus.
You're out of order! The whole trial is out of order! They're out of order!
Greetings everybody, Maximus here. So I'm going to assume if you clicked on this video, you are already pretty well versed in the history of Boeing and their disastrous 737 MAX, so I won't waste a lot of time rehashing those details. However, after evading any prison or real punishment over the past 5 years, and even after a U.S. court declared that the families of the two MAX crashes were indeed crime victims, the court restricted by law wasn't allowed to overturn the sweetheart deal Boeing made with the U.S. Department of Justice to just pay some fines and set up funding for some of the victims' families. However, that ruling did leave open the door for crash victims' families to sue Boeing for additional pain and suffering during the crashes. And that's the subject of this video. So over the past 5 years since the crashes, Boeing has settled about 3/4 of all the civil claims that the victims' families have filed against them, and has also resolved investigations by federal prosecutors and securities regulators, pretty much just getting away with paying some fines. And now all outstanding cases, with the exception of a few cases from the first Lion Air crash, have been settled, along with a recent additional 5 cases from the second Ethiopian Air crash that were scheduled to head to a possible future trial were also settled this month. However, there still are quite a few more families' lawsuits that haven't been settled, and they are scheduled to go to trial this June in Chicago, Illinois, where the recently now Arlington, Virginia-based Boeing company had its headquarters at the time of the crashes. According to the Wall Street Journal, at issue in the June MAX case is whether compensation should be available for the victims' pain and suffering. But, and this is a big but, because the case is being tried in Illinois, and this could be a huge roadblock for the families. And this is where the whole case gets completely disgusting. And frankly, this is where I personally finally have lost all respect for Boeing and its management, not only as a company but as human beings in general. In a recent pre-trial court filing, Boeing's attorneys cited an expert who said, "Now wait for it, because Boeing is really claiming this." In court, Boeing, through their attorney, said that the 737 MAX victims lost their lives painlessly because the airplane crashed into the ground so fast that their brains didn't have time to process pain signals from their nervous system. And if you're like me, you're thinking that's the biggest load of crap I've ever heard in my life. While yes, Boeing's paid hatchet men are technically correct, the act of dying while hitting the ground at 700 miles per hour would cause no pain. However, that's not what the victims' families are arguing about. Not at all. Consider Lion Air was in the air for 13 minutes, and Ethiopian was in the air for 6 minutes. And the entire time on both doomed aircraft, those passengers experienced the roller coaster ride from hell before the end finally and mercifully came. But that's not all, because Boeing's attorneys went on to claim that without sufficient evidence that the victims experienced pain and suffering in the milliseconds between their injuries and deaths, Illinois law only allows damages related to plaintiffs' grief and loss, not the victim suffering. So did you catch it? The part about Illinois law? That's right. In Illinois, by law, you can only sue for pain and loss during the crash, or to put it more literally, only during the physical act of dying. But Illinois law doesn't allow for any pain and suffering before the actual impact. No wonder the most corrupt city in America, Chicago, is located in Illinois. It's an absolutely ridiculous law. But wait, it gets even more disgusting. Because in a February 27th filing, Boeing's lawyer said that it recognizes the tremendous tragedy suffered by the families, but they also wrote that Illinois law provide that evidence of passengers' pre-impact pain and suffering may not be admitted to support a damages award in this case. Man, how gutless is that? Okay, so I'd like you to try an experiment after you watch this video. Just find a place, sit down, and set a timer for 13 minutes or even 6 minutes, and see how much time that really is. Now imagine knowing you are never going to see your wife or your husband or children or loved ones ever again, plus enduring a sickening ride and eventual supersonic plunge into the earth at 700 miles per hour. Yeah, tell me that's not pain and suffering. It was in 2021 that Boeing admitted responsibility for the second crash in court, as well as in a deal with the victims' families' attorneys to take potential punitive damages off the table in the lawsuits. Punitive damages are amounts of money defendants must pay as punishment above the initial crime. But with some of the lawsuits filed by relatives of about 80 victims of the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crash set for trial in June, Boeing is asking a federal judge to limit what jurors can consider when determining how much the company must pay in compensatory damages. At stake are potentially millions of dollars per plaintiff. Boeing told the court that evidence about the victim's suffering would, quote, prejudice and confuse the jury, possibly leading them to award the victims and their families an amount that is tantamount to punitive damages. Oh, really? You think, Boeing? That's exactly what the jury should decide. Boeing attorneys are afraid that jurors would inevitably sympathize with testimony about the passengers' alleged fear of impending death and imagine themselves in the passenger's shoes. Yes, slimy Boeing lawyer, that's exactly what American jurors are supposed to do. However, refuting that ridiculous claim, the victims' families' attorneys said that Boeing's position actually goes against Illinois law and the earlier agreement they signed with Boeing. The attorneys for the victims' families told the court that the 157 people on board the Ethiopian MAX undeniably suffered horrific emotional distress, pain, and suffering, and physical impact injury while they endured extreme G-forces for at least 6 minutes as they braced for impact, all the while knowing the airplane was malfunctioning and ultimately plummeted nose down into the ground at a terrifying speed. As part of the legal dispute over the victims' suffering in the remaining lawsuits, both Boeing and the families have hired expert witnesses. In court documents, experts for both sides have addressed various physical and psychological questions, including whether victims knew they were going to die, if seatbelts could have injured passengers because of gravitational forces, or whether the unbelted passengers would have hit the ceiling. Troy Fayborg, an aerospace physiologist and one of the witnesses for the victims' families, said in court that the victims most assuredly would have experienced issues such as panic, nausea, heart problems, as well as other gruesome effects that I can't say on YouTube. Vicki Norton, a commercial airline pilot hired as a witness by the victims' families, wrote in a court filing that it wasn't long before the progressive loss of control and ultimate dive to the ground would have been not only distressing, but terror-inducing to all passengers on board. But of course, Boeing disputed the plaintiff's expert testimony as speculative, and instead of arguing the facts, they argued that under Illinois law, damages aren't available for pre-impact fright and terror. Wow, that really shows Boeing's compassion for human life, doesn't it? But Jonathan French, this genius, a Boeing witness who is an expert in human factors and aerospace physiology, actually told the court this ridiculous statement. While passengers undoubtedly perceive the flight as scary, humans have a tendency to hold on to hope and not expect the worst. Ultimately, it is impossible to know the subjective experience of each occupant. Man, Boeing has lost all shame just to avoid paying some money for pain and suffering. For God's sakes, man, these were humans, not robots. However, legal scholars on both sides say the Illinois law is a high hurdle to overcome, but ultimately it will be up to the judge. Okay, look, I don't care how stupid the laws in Illinois are, but this just continues to be about Boeing trying to avoid doing the right thing for the families and passengers of an inferior product that Boeing knew was flawed, just in order to save the stockholders' profits in the process. Plus, doing all this while trying to convince the world that Boeing has changed and now it's all about safety first. Well, that's going to wrap it up for now. Now it's your turn. Seriously, I always say this, but I really want to hear from you on this one, so let me know down below. Oh, and I need to give a shout out to one of the channel's best supporters, Dr. G. Thank you for your 20 virtual coffees. Your support is always amazing and appreciated. And if you would like to help support the channel, the Buy Me a Coffee and merch links are always in the description. Of course, if you would consider subscribing, I would appreciate it. And don't forget to like, share, and ring the bell. And remember, leave the rubber on the runway and your troubles on the ground. And I will see you next time in the air. Yeah, this is Maximus.